Behind every great team, every great dynasty in sports was a general manager who assembled that team and got the right coaches for that group of players. So today we are going to be doing a general manager review over my favorite hockey team's general manager, Don Sweeney. This man is hotly contested in Boston, whether he should be fired, should have been fired years ago, or if that extension he got was justified. So let's get into it. I got a tier list, and in this one we're going to be going over all of his trades that he has made since becoming the general manager. We're going to do another one for his draft history and his free agent and re-signings, and then we're going to combine all those together and get a final score. And what I personally feel, how he's done as the general manager of the Boston Bruins. So this is the tier list we got going on. It's got your S tier up at the top, meaning it's a super trade, absolute steal of a trade. Boston robbed the other team and got some great value out of it. A tier, it's an amazing trade. Boston made out really well, and the other team might have been able to get a little something out of Boston. B tier, just meaning it was a good trade for Boston. They got some good value out of it, and I'd say they win the trade. C plus tier, it means they barely won. I think they edged out the other team in the trade, but it was still a pretty fair trade. Both teams got something nice out of it. C tier just means it was an even trade across the board. It was equal value. Both teams got something out of it. C minus tier, Boston slightly lost a trade, but I still think Don Sweeney got something out of the trade that was able to be flipped or used later on as a good asset. D tier means I think Don Sweeney just straight up lost the trade. There's no way he could have won that trade. He just completely lost it, but it's still not as bad as an F tier trade where he just completely failed, completely flopped. I don't even know what he was possibly thinking when he made this trade happen. And then doesn't matter. There's always some AHL trades, some minor trades that really just end up being nothing in the grand scheme of things. So, and I do think some trades do fall into this category, so that's why I got it here. So, let's go ahead and get into this because he's got a lot of trades. Let me know what you guys think of his trade history and what you think of Don Sweeney down in the comments, because I got some mixed feelings because I think he really has earned a right to be the general manager. I mean, he broke the wins and points record, but that same season they got bounced in the first round in 7, blowing a 3-1 lead. So, and then also he's had this team get to the Cup Finals. He had them back in 2019, but there were glaring holes, glaring issues in that team, even though they made it all the way to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. I believe it was 7 against St. Louis. Let's go back to the very beginning, where at first it looked like he was starting to cook a little something, but not before an ass trade, okay? His very first trade was Carl Soderberg for a 6th-round pick. Now, I don't know what he was thinking when he traded Carl Soderberg for a 6th-round pick. Carl Soderberg was coming off a 44-point season, was a +10. He was a solid two-way forward for the team. He had just come on. Yeah, he was a little older coming on, but still, man, you were only got a 6th-round pick for a guy who put up damn near 50 points in the last 2 seasons, each of them. And then in Colorado, he actually does do that and is a solid depth center for Colorado for a few years. Only getting a 6th-round pick out of Carl Soderberg, even at the time, it just made absolutely no sense to me. And so automatically, I would say he got off to a rough start. I'm going to have to put Carl Soderberg. I'm going to go, I don't want to give it a complete F tier. You know, I'm giving it a complete F tier. That 6th-round pick became absolutely nothing for Boston. I'm pretty sure. Let me do a quick double check. You know, after doing a double check, I did completely forget about this small fact. With Soderberg was up for a new contract, but we still had the rights to him, so we could have signed him. But, I mean, if Don Sweeney really did want to get rid of him, then his RFA rights, I mean, no one would have paid a price to actually get some sort of draft compensation out of him that way. I'll just put it in D tier. I'll give Don Sweeney the benefit of the doubt, because now this is where it's going to get really interesting right away, because the next 3 trades that Don Sweeney makes would change the franchise forever. For better or for worse, this is what he did. Dougie Hamilton for a 1st and 2 second-round picks. Milan Lucic for Martin Jones, Colin Miller, and a 1st-round pick. And then Don Sweeney immediately, a couple days later, flipped Martin Jones for a 1st-round pick and Sean Corrali. Now, this is where it gets into some real nitty-gritty kind of facts about what these kind of picks ended up becoming, okay? First things first, we got to give Don Sweeney some props with this, because what Milan Lucic became after this trade, it was a complete steal, okay? It really was. Milan Lucic really fell off a cliff. Not really, he had a solid season in LA, and then in Edmonton he fell off a cliff. He had that massive deal getting like $6 million a year. Clearly was not the same player. Any sort of little bit of speed he did have in Boston had already quickly evaporated, and he just was not the same player. And so with that being said, now, Dougie Hamilton went on to completely be a stud still, okay? Martin Jones went on to actually be a Stanley Cup losing goaltender. He was really solid. At the time, I thought that was crazy value. That I loved Martin Jones. I was a Manchester Monarch / LA Kings fan because I'm from New Hampshire. So I knew Martin Jones. I was a big fan of him. I thought he was going to be a good goalie. I still thought being able to get a first-round pick for him at that time was a great trade. Even though he did work out for San Jose relatively, they still never won a cup with that super team led by Joe Thornton and company, with Patrick Marleau, all of them, Joe Pavelski. But so with that being said, with a trade like the Milan Lucic and Dougie Hamilton trade, if they drafted good with these picks, just based on the value, it would instantly, I'd have to go especially like the Milan Lucic trade, it's going all the way up in like S tier, A tier at the minimum, but we are far from 2015, so we have a lot of context now, and the context of who these picks became kill everything. They really do. Okay, let's first go over who they got with the picks. Okay, so with the picks they traded for, this is what they ended up getting for them. With the picks they ended up taking at 13th, they ended up going Jacob Zaboral, which is the pick they got from LA. So Milan Lucic turns into Martin Jones, Colin Miller, and Jacob Zaboral. Okay, and then 14 is the Bruins pick, and then at 15, Zachary Senyshyn is the first round pick they used from Dougie Hamilton, and then they go Jacob Forsbacka-Karlsson and Jeremy Lazone with the other second round picks in that trade. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or anyone with any sort of math skills to look at those players and look at the stats real quickly and say, yeah, they got fucking robbed. Especially in the Dougie Hamilton. Senyshyn, now, this is the other issue though, okay? If Don Sweeney, now we're going to get more into this when we go over his draft history, okay? But if Don Sweeney had half a brain, he would have drafted Barzal, Kyle Connor, Chabot. Now, I didn't know at the time, I was a young kid, I didn't know too much about Kyle Connor and Thomas Chabot, so I didn't blame him for skipping out on those two, okay? And I knew who Jake DeBrusk was, so I was perfectly fine with that draft pick. Zachary Senyshyn and Jacob Zaboral I had never heard of before this draft. Before they were taken at 13 and 15, I had never heard of them. And you know who I desperately wanted? I wanted NHL legend Matthew Barzal. Okay? If you knew NHL 14, NHL 15, he was always going pick 2. Pick 1 was Connor McDavid. Pick 2 was Matthew Barzal. I wanted Matthew Barzal in a Bruins uni so badly. I was thinking, think of the future. Bergeron, Krejci, Barzal. You're going to have the nasty... Then you could go Barzal at the wing. Bergeron, Barzal, and whoever. Because, of course, Pasta at the time, he hadn't completely broken out yet. So I was like, man, but maybe Pasta, Bergeron, Barzal. It would have been the great... Then you got Marchand, Krejci, and whoever on the second line. At the time, I think Sagan had already been... Yeah, Sagan was moved by the last GM, so it would have been Louis Eriksson on the second line. That would have been a nasty second line. But no, they go. Or Jake DeBrusk could have filled in on the second line. He was a perfectly fine second liner for a time. But no, they instead go Zachary Senyshyn, Jacob Forsbacka-Karlsson, Jeremy Lazone. And then with the other pick from Milan Lucic, they go Jacob Zaboral. Now, Colin Miller was a fine 6th, 7th D. I said it. For the Bruins for a little bit of time, I liked Colin Miller. Martin Jones, we got great value out of. So, with that being said, the two trades that were at the 2015 draft or affecting the 2015 draft, so not counting the Martin Jones trade, let's quickly go over this. Milan Lucic, he was about to fall off a cliff. He got good value, but the other thing with Milan Lucic is Martin Jones, and we're going to get into that trade in a second because Martin Jones actually works out hugely for the Boston Bruins. And they used Martin Jones from this trade, so I have to take that into consideration. So I'm going to give it a B. I'm going to give it a B. Because of what we got with Martin Jones, it's going to be a B, which we'll go over in a second. It could have been an S. It could have been an A. It could be C plus if you really want to, but I'm going to give it a B. Next, Dougie Hamilton. It's honestly a straight F. There's no way around it. Because of what the Boston Bruins got out of the Dougie Hamilton trade. Actually, I'm going to give it a D because the concept of a first and 2 seconds for Dougie Hamilton wasn't... I'm going to give it an F. No, because Dougie Hamilton was like a top 2 D-man already. He could have been a franchise defenseman for the Boston Bruins. They got rid of him for peanuts. So now I'm going to make it an F tier. They didn't get it. Now, if they got Thomas Chabot, and it could have been an S. It could have been. I'm going to give it a D. Because of what it could have been, I am going to leave it as a D. But this trade was awful. This trade, it was bad. It was bad for the Boston Bruins, okay? So, next, the Martin Jones trade. The silver lining of the Milan Lucic trade. Made 4 days later. Martin Jones for Sean Corrali in a first-round pick. Sean Corrali, nasty third, fourth-line center, even to the point where the Bruins are bringing him back a decade later. That is why it is an S-tier trade. No, not really. The real reason why it's going to be such a great trade for the Boston Bruins is that 2016 first-round pick turns into Charlie McAvoy, okay? The franchise defenseman for the Boston Bruins has had years... I'd say he's been top 5 some years. I think he's been that good. Call me a homer. I don't give a fuck. Charlie McAvoy has been a superstar for the Boston Bruins. So for that reason, and that reason only, it is the saving grace of the Martin Jones and the Milan Lucic trades is who they ended up getting with that first round pick in 2016, hitting on Charlie McAvoy. And I know it could have been amazing. Chabot and McAvoy, lefty-righty combo could have been generational. But still, at least they got McAvoy, and later on, we'll go over the point where they do still find a guy to pair up with Charlie McAvoy. So, the Charlie McAvoy trade, a.k.a. the Martin Jones trade, I am going to give this one an A. Now, Martin Jones, he does end up bringing the... I'm going to give it a B. I'm going to give it an A. Because Martin Jones, even though he led the Sharks to that Cup final that one year, it wasn't like he was a franchise-defining goalie. It's not like he was there for a decade plus. He wasn't a Tuukka Rask. He wasn't a Sergei Bobrovsky, even a Braden Holtby. He wasn't any of those guys. But he was really good within his own right. But it's still an A trade. Being able to hit on Charlie McAvoy and get a depth forward that played with you for at least half a decade. Minimum. He might have had a couple more years. I'm not sure exactly how many years Corrali spent in Boston, but it's been a lot of years he's spent his time in Boston. So I'd say that is the first A trade. So in that first leg of trades, when he first hit Boston pre-draft, it was a decent start, honestly. It probably balances out the way it looks, probably around a C. He did all right with those 2015 trades all in all. But, of course, it's going to look a bit differently when we go over the draft history. But that's just the trade history. So, let's go ahead and now get into the second page. Those are all the trades on the third page. So, now let's scroll down here to the next trade, which is Riley Smith and Mark Savard for Jimmy Hayes, okay? Now, rest in peace, Jimmy Hayes, okay? He took his own life. It's a really sad story. This means no disrespect to him. I'm just talking in a purely hockey standpoint, okay? But Jimmy Hayes did come to Boston, and he had his struggles. He had his best season in Florida, which was with that 35 points, never got better than that in Boston. And when the Bruins made this trade, I didn't like the trade. I really liked Riley Smith. I thought he was a nice little nifty top 9 sniper. Of course, he would end up being a pretty crucial part of a cup team later on down the line. Didn't see that coming. But still, Jimmy Hayes wasn't quite the answer for the Boston Bruins. Riley Smith would end up having a pretty nice career. Now, granted, he did not spend a lot of time with Florida due to the fact that they would end up, I'm pretty sure, I forget if Vegas actually just straight up took him, or if Florida gave Riley Smith to Vegas to not take someone else. I know a lot of teams are doing that back then, but Riley Smith would go on to have a pretty nice career. Never was a 30-goal scorer, had a few years where he got pretty damn close, but he was a good role player. You know, when the Bruins needed that depth scoring in years like 2019, a guy like Riley Smith would have been amazing. Like, literally the year the Bruins made the Cup Finals, Riley Smith was having 20-goal seasons. He was damn near 30 in 2019, 2020. So after making all those trades in that offseason, accumulating draft picks, adding Jimmy Hayes, the Boston Bruins, Don Sweeney was trying to get this team back into the playoffs, okay? So at the deadline, after trading for draft picks and doing a quick retool, he says it's time to ship those draft picks out and trades a second and a fourth for Lee Stepniak and then a third and a fifth in Anthony Kamara for John Michael Lyles. Now, you would think if Don Sweeney, after adding picks and clearly looking like he's going through a little retool, if he's now trading away those picks, this team must have gotten off to a hot start and been rolling their way through the league, going into the playoffs strong that year. You would be wrong. They ended up missing the playoffs, going with 93 points. Their last 10, though, is a total collapse. 3-6-1 isn't even the worst of it, man. All of March, it just felt like a total collapse. They were in the driver's seat. They were in a playoff spot all year, just to then, at the very last minute of the season, just collapse and then miss the playoffs off of a tiebreaker. Now, Lee Stepniak would do all right here. He had 10 points in 19 games, but trading away a second and a fourth for a guy who only played that 1 year on a team that missed the playoffs. And guys, that's not even the worst of it, okay, when it comes to ranking this Lee Stepniak trade. Because it's already, because of the fact they missed the playoffs, okay, and Lee Stepniak only played one season and they traded a second and a fourth for it, it's already like a C- at best, okay? But then it gets worse. That second round pick that they traded to New Jersey in this trade, okay, ended up being Jesper Bachfest, a really nice third, fourth line center for him, or just winger in general. He didn't always play center in New Jersey. But so I think he ended up being a really solid player that played multiple years there. So because the second round pick ended up actually turning into something pretty nice for the Devils, getting a depth forward like Jesper Bachfest for Lee Stepniak, again, I have to give it a D. They missed the playoffs. He then ended up becoming a pretty solid player in return for the Devils. It's nothing but a D. You can maybe give it a C-. I feel like I was a little gracious on like the Carl Soderberg one, so this one I'm not being as gracious. Next, John Michael Lyles. Well, he at least played another season for the Boston Bruins. He was just a depth defenseman, though. He played a lot of playoff games, though, that season, but he clearly wasn't the same John Michael Lyles that he had been earlier in his career. He was at the very end of his career. He was a nice little depth defenseman, though. I did like his time in Boston, and the picks that they gave up for him didn't really become too much for the Carolina Hurricanes, but it was still some decent value at the time, giving up a third-round pick for that. So because of that, I'm going to give the John Michael Lyles trade a straight-up C, because he was part of a playoff team the very next season. He did stick around for that next season, so that's what I'm going to be doing for that one. The very next trade on the docket now is going to be Drew Stafford from the Winnipeg Jets for a conditional sixth-round pick. Now, this pick would end up being absolutely nothing in hindsight. Drew Stafford was nothing more than just like a sub-in guy for the Boston Bruins. This trade didn't really have much impact, but the fact that they did technically get some NHL-level talent out of this trade for just a sixth-round pick, I'm going to give it a C. Okay, next trade on the docket is going to be the Nick Holden for Rob O'Gara and a third-round pick. Now, Nick Holden for a third-rounder, what are we doing? Luckily, the pick didn't really become anything. Rob O'Gara didn't become anything. But just on the sheer conception, on the sheer concept of trading a third-round pick for Nick Holden, I got to give it a C-. Luckily, it didn't really matter. It didn't mean anything. But just on the sheer concept of how much value they gave up for a guy like Nick Holden, C-, off rip instantly like that. Next, we got the Frank Vatrano for a third-round pick trade. Now, Frank Vatrano would end up being a very solid player. 30-goal scorer. Over a 30-goal scorer. I think he had like 37 goals. It's going to show up on the screen. But I think he had like 37 goals or something like that. in Anaheim, though, not with Florida. So if you take his numbers just from Florida, he wasn't that spectacular in Florida. So being able to just get a third-round pick out of that, but he was still a 20 goal scorer even in Florida. So only getting a third-round pick that would then not really become anything for the Boston Bruins. It's a rough trade, especially seeing what Vatrano could become and the potential that he has showed throughout his entire career. I'm going to have to give the Frank Vatrano trade. I'm feeling a C-. I'm also feeling a D. I'm going to go D. I'm going to give him a D. Because, Vatrano, the very next year, he was a 20-goal scorer. So, clearly, it's not like it took a couple years for him to break out. There was untapped potential that Don Sweeney and the Bruins just couldn't extract from him. But even in Boston, I thought he was becoming a nifty little player for the Bruins. Even though he wasn't really putting up a lot of points yet for the Bruins, just in that little bit of time that he was here, I really liked him. So, because of that, we're going to give him a D. Now, the next trade on name value, you would think, looking at the names, you would think the Boston Bruins had to have won this trade because of who they got. The Boston Bruins in 2018 going on a buying spree after trading away Frank Vatrano doesn't make sense. This doesn't really make sense at all because they really could use Vatrano for this playoff run. But doesn't matter now. That's why it's a D. But the Bruins trade for Rick the Dick Nash. And Rick Nash truly was a dick to the Boston Bruins with just how piss poor he played here and how little he played here. And then the New York Rangers got a haul for Rick Nash. I don't know what the Bruins were thinking at the time because I wanted Rick Nash. Don't get me wrong, I wanted him. But I didn't want him for this price even at the time because I was like, we're going to have to re-sign him and stuff. And then he doesn't even re-sign. You know what he ends up doing? Oh, he just ends up deciding to retire. He calls it a career. He says, I'm done. Which he probably should have, because he sucked for the Bruins. He was doing absolutely nothing for the Boston Bruins. He was doing decent with the Rangers. But still, he wasn't that 40-goal scorer he was 3-4 years ago. And this is something we're going to see Don Sweeney do yet again in other aspects of his career, where he looks at someone's high from 3-4 years ago and goes, I can get that again. He thought he could get that with Rick Nash again for the postseason run. He couldn't. He did absolutely nothing. Looking at his playoff numbers here, this is what he did. In 12 games, he had 5 points. It was a -7. Of course, plus minus doesn't tell the whole story. But -7 with only 5 points for Rick Nash. When you give up what you give up a first, Ryan Spooner, Matt Bolesky, Ryan Lindgren, who ended up being a very good defensive defenseman for the Rangers, a first-round pick, and a 7th-round pick, okay? And let's take a look real quick, because Ryan Spooner, he hasn't been in the league for a minute. He hasn't really been that relevant at the very least. I liked Ryan Spooner. I really did. I loved him. I thought he was a great bottom 6 center for the Bruins. And at a time, I'll be honest, I thought maybe he had a little top 6 potential. That was a little young me having a little bit too much hope for a guy like Ryan Spooner. But still, he was still a really solid player. And his year in New York, he put up more points than Rick Nash did for the Bruins. He put up more points than Rick Nash, and the Bruins gave up a first and Ryan Lindgren on top of it. Matt Bolesky was more of a salary dump. We'll get into when he go over the free agent signings. Matt Bolesky, definitely not one of the better ones. But still, man, Ryan Spooner was able to do so much for the New York Rangers that Rick Nash couldn't do for the Boston Bruins and all the rest. And so then the question is, well, who was the first-round pick that the New York Rangers used? Well, they ended up just taking Nils Lundqvist, so at least in this regard, it didn't bite them in the ass too much. And Ryan Lindgren hurt, but luckily this first-round pick didn't become anything else, okay? Now, we're going to actually kind of see a common theme. For the most part, Don Sweeney kind of gets lucky when he trades away draft picks. They don't really become much. Jesper Bokvist and Lee Stepniak one is going to be one of the better ones we actually see come out of these picks that he trades away. But still, just on the sheer concept of value and everything they gave up and how little of a return Rick Nash really brought. If they were getting, they gave up the value of, prime Rick Nash. But they got washed Rick Nash. It's an F trade. I hate to say it. I love Rick Nash. He's one of my favorite players of the 2010s. I was hyped when he was a Bruin, but he clearly just wasn't the same guy anymore. It's an F trade. I hate to do it. I actually do hate to rank that trade an F, but like just based off of everything they gave up, you could argue it's a D because like it's not like they really gave up a franchise-defining player in the end, luckily, but like they gave up so much value. But we're gonna keep moving on now. Next, Tommy Wingles for a conditional 5th-round pick. Now, when I say like trades that don't really matter, this is one of the trades that probably doesn't matter. So I'm just going to rate it in doesn't matter. You could give it a C if you really want. It could be a C. I'm just going to say it doesn't really matter. It doesn't. Next trade up is going to be the Adam McQuaid for Steven Kampfer, a 4th and a 7th. On the surface of it, you could argue doesn't really matter. But I'm going to argue against that and say McQuaid was a bit of an overpaid pylon, so being able to get Steven Kampfer, who he's not really anything, but being able to get a 4th and 7th, I feel like for what McQuaid was and how old he was at the time too, they actually extracted some sort of value. I give Don Sweeney props for that. So call me whatever, call me kissing his ass or whatever. I'm gonna give it a C plus. I'm gonna give him a C plus for being able to get rid of Adam McQuaid for a 4th, 7th, and Steven Kampfer on the contract he was on. If he was still on the contract I'm remembering him on. Okay. So now in the 2018-2019 season, after trading away Adam McQuaid for Kampfer, a 4th and a 7th, they have a little bit more money, but before they get to some real buying, they just do a little nothing trade. Paul Carey for Cody Golem Beth. I have no idea who that is. This trade, it is another absolute just kind of nothing trade. Has no effect in the greater NHL scheme of things. Gonna have to come over here and just give it a quick little doesn't matter. There we go. Does not matter, Paul Carey. Next, the big first trade of the buying season when the Bruins would go on their Stanley Cup run. They traded for Charlie Coyle. The Bruins, the Massachusetts man, the Bruins fan himself, Charlie Coyle, for Ryan Donato and a 5th-round pick. This trade, what Charlie Coyle did for the Bruins, he truly was a great player for the Boston Bruins. Okay, I mean, look at these stats. He had a 60-point season in their record-breaking season. He was a really good top 9 forward, okay? I think this is a great trade for the Bruins. Ryan Donato didn't do too much for Minnesota, but turned into a 60-point man himself in the more recent years over there in Chicago. But still, when it comes to just the straight up, how did they affect each other? I'd say the Bruins came out on top in this trade between Charlie Coyle and Ryan Donato, even though the Bruins would later overpay Charlie Coyle. I don't know how Charlie Coyle got 5.25 from the Boston Bruins. I genuinely have no idea what Don Sweeney was thinking for that. But there's one aspect of this trade that holds it down, that stops this trade from sending this Charlie Coyle trade up into, like, I don't even know, man. We could send it all the way up into, like, maybe B tier. You could go B tier probably for Charlie Coyle, for Ryan, even with the bad contract. But you can't do it. You know why? Because this little 2019 5th-round pick. Who did this 2019 5th-round pick become? You might be wondering, because I am really pointing out a 5th-round pick when I haven't previously. Oh, it was just Kirill Kaprizov, who just signed the largest contract in NHL history, was this 5th-round pick. The Minnesota Wild turned Charlie Coyle into Kirill Kaprizov and Ryan Donato. Now, I'm not going to fault Don Sweeney too much, because odds are if the Bruins had that 5th-round pick, they are not taking Kirill Kaprizov. I just have a good feeling about that. But overall, it's still not the worst trade he could have made. So I'm actually still going to rate it somewhat all right. I'm just going to give it a C- because the concept of Charlie Coyle for Donato in a 5th should not bite you in the ass. But it did, okay? They ended up with Kirill Kaprizov. They got a superstar. I'm going to give it a C- just on the principle of the trade, okay? It's kind of like, it's could be the reason why you might argue Dougie Hamilton should not be an F, you know? It's because of the principle of the trade should be all right. What it turned out to be is a little bit different, okay? So, the next big trade on the docket now is Marcus Johansson he wasn't done buying. Don Sweeney was going all in on a cup in a way, not trading a first quite yet. Not going to be trading a first at all this season, actually. But they end up trading a second, a fourth for Marcus Johansson. Now, Marcus Johansson in his time with Boston, not good. Not good at all, if we're being honest about his time here in Boston, especially in the regular season, okay? Now, it changes actually a little bit in the playoffs, luckily. But in the regular season, it was really looking like a tough trade to start out. Only 3 points in the 10 games he had, was a -1, was really not sinking in quite right with the boys. But luckily, things would change around in the playoffs. He would actually end up going out and getting a good point every other game pace, so a 40-point pace if you were to do an actual regular season with it, if you really wanted to do it like that. Like, let me pull it up over here. Here we go. As you can see, pretty much right at my jawline, right over here. Yeah, right there. You can see the 11 points in 22 games during the Stanley Cup final run. He was a very solid piece. Couldn't end up winning a cup final, but the fact that he actually ended up being a pretty solid piece during a cup final run does mean something. Now, he would immediately leave, and so it's another player that Don Sweeney ends up trading for and is not able to retain. He ends up going to Buffalo, and he makes his way back to Washington at some point. But because of the fact that he was part of a Stanley Cup final run, that does matter. That does mean something in the grand scheme of things, I would think. I'm going to give the Marcus Johansson trade, I'll give it a C+, okay? Because he didn't end up retaining him, but he was part of a cup final run, but they didn't win the cup finals, and he wasn't, like, spectacular during them. So I'm going to give it a C+. Now, that would be it for the Stanley Cup final run, and that would be the last time the Bruins have made the Stanley Cup finals. But it wouldn't be the last time Don Sweeney tries to make the cup finals. And he would also soon meet a new best friend, the Anaheim Ducks. I feel like the Ducks have become a frequent trading partner for the Boston Bruins. And it all starts right here when the Bruins unload David Backes for Andre Casse. It ends up taking Axel Anderson in a first-round pick to get rid of David Backes. And honestly, I applaud Don Sweeney. He got rid of David Backes. Now, this is going to be a weird conundrum when we talk about the final talks, because the signing of David Backes is an F, okay? That's an instant F, spoiler alert. But the trading away of David Backes, getting Andre Casse, and who the first actually ends up being, getting lucky enough that this first round pick doesn't turn into a damn thing for the Anaheim Ducks is an absolute miracle. That it ends up just being Jacob Perreault and Axel Anderson, who was another, I think he was a second-round pick for the Boston Bruins. He had some potential. He ends up being absolutely nothing. Casse, he was really nothing for the Boston Bruins also, but the fact that they got rid of him, they got rid of David Backes, that alone makes it like a C+ trade. I think they win the trade. They gave up all of that. They didn't end up losing like a key piece in the trade because the first turns into nothing, and Axel Anderson is nothing, and they get Casse, who plays some game for the Bruins, does better than Backes would have. One thing I don't understand, let me know if you're a real big Bruins fans and you understand this. How did David Backes ever have an A on his chest? Some of you might remember he wore an A for a little bit of time. I don't get how he ever was given the A because of his bum ass being washed in Boston. It was unreal, okay? Next, Nick Ritchie for Danton Heinen. On the surface, when the Bruins first made this trade, I loved it. Why? Because I love Nick Ritchie. He was an NHL 14 legend. If you know, you know. He was always a great power forward to get an NHL 14. In real life, not as great, but I thought he was going to do a bit better than he would end up doing in Boston. Sadly, though, he did not. He wasn't that special in Boston. And Danton Heinen, luckily, though, didn't really pop off for Anaheim. You know, you might think of Danton Heinen as a pretty good bottom six forward recently, but no, he was actually not that good in Anaheim. Both teams kind of ended up kind of losing out in the trade. Both players played worse, I feel like, on the teams when they got swapped. It's a weird trade. It's just going to be ending up, I think, as just a C-tier trade. I think Danton Heinen ends up coming back to Boston, does pretty solid in Pittsburgh, just not in Anaheim. It was a weird time. I don't know. So the Nick Ritchie trade, I'm just going to make that one a C, okay? The very next trade is Mike Riley for a third-round pick to the Ottawa Senators. Now, Mike Riley was a pretty solid defenseman when he got brought into Boston, his very first initial signing, when we traded for him for that third-round pick. He was actually a really solid player. There was a point in time when I thought, damn, we really might have just stole a guy from Ottawa, and he's actually going to be a really solid player. And then, I don't know what happened. They signed him to that 3x3. I mean, I didn't like the 3x3 originally. I was like, why are we giving Mike Riley? Yeah, he's played pretty solid, but why are we giving Mike Riley a 3x3? And then he doesn't even really play well on that 3x3. I'm pretty sure it's a 3x3. 3 years, $3 million, if you don't know what I mean by 3x3. So, just in the end, for a third-round pick for what he provided when he first got here, it was definitely solid. Then what he ended up being after that, after he signs that contract extension, it really hurts. It's hard for me now to think, this is where it's I need to separate the signing from the trade. But it's kind of like they kind of work together, though, in a way. So because of what the signing was after the trade, if it was just the trade and they signed him to a better deal, it could be a B. It genuinely could have been a B. But because of this contract they gave him afterwards, I'm going to give it a C-. But it's still, on the surface of it, it was not a bad trade. It's just the contract afterwards, it brings it down. You could argue maybe leave it as C then, but it was so much money. I just can't do it. He was an AHLer getting $3 million a year. I can't. Okay? But this next trade, Don Sweeney kind of went on a little bit of a heater here, okay? In 2021, same day as the Mike Riley trade, Don Sweeney goes out and gets Taylor Hall and Curtis Lazar for Anders Bjork and a second-round pick. When the Bruins made this trade, I genuinely was like, this is the greatest trade Don Sweeney has ever made. This is instantly the best trade this man has ever made. Taylor Hall, absolute stud, a Hart winner. He is a true superstar. I couldn't wait to have him in Boston. I couldn't believe that we were having this Hart winner in Boston. I knew that he was struggling in Buffalo, and I didn't care. I was saying it's Taylor Hall, and it's Buffalo, okay? This isn't the 2026 Sabres. This is the 2020 Sabres, where everyone that goes there plays worse. It was a weird time, man. It felt like every time a player left Buffalo, they went back to being a star, and Taylor Hall was no different, man. Taylor Hall, instantly a 60-point man. But I really thought that second year, he was going to be a point-per-game, 70, 80-point guy, especially with how hot he was when he first got traded to Boston. I think this trade date is wrong because there's no way he was traded April 11th. That doesn't make sense to me. Trade deadline's a month before that, but that's what the date of this website says. I know it was around that time, though. In 2021, they trade for him at the deadline. He becomes an instant star. I absolutely love him in Boston. And just for the value, they only traded away a second on Anders Bjork, and they got Curtis Lazar. They got a fourth-line replacement for Bjork. Even though I like Bjork, for Taylor Hall in a second, this is an amazing trade. Now, yeah, they never won a Stanley Cup with Taylor Hall. Guess what? I don't care. They broke the wins record. They broke the points record. It's still an S-tier trade to this day. It is the best trade for the value they gave up and the player they got, a Hart winner. It was a true addition of we're truly turning into a super team. And it didn't come to a Stanley Cup fruition, but it was still a great ad. Next, Daniel Vladar for a third-round pick. Daniel Vladar, obviously, after really doing incredible things in Philly, had that incredible run in Philly, a Linsanity type run, but he was never going to be a guy here in Boston. Just being able to get a third-round pick out of him, it's pretty solid. It's all right value. I'm just going to go ahead and give it. The third-round pick didn't really become much. It was more than what they gave up. He wasn't much in Boston, didn't do much in Calgary. I'm going to just give it a C+, honestly. I'm going to give Don Sweeney the slight edge because this continues his Linsanity run of trades when they go out and get Hampus Lindholm from the Anaheim Ducks for John Moore, Euro Bakanainen, a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a second-round pick. All right, and the best part about this trade is, again, the draft picks Don Sweeney gave up did not really become anything. Nathan Gauthier was the first-round pick. The Ducks didn't hit on those draft picks. Euro Vakanainen was like a high second-round pick. Turns into nothing. He looked like he had some promise in Boston. John Moore, nothing. And the Bruins got a top-tier, top-2 D-man. If you remember, before Hampus Lindholm got hurt in the record-breaking year, there were talks that Lindholm was the Norris candidate, not Charlie McAvoy. Now, of course, in 2026, he's had some more hip issues. He's been playing a little more hurt, and he's clearly not looking quite right. Hopefully he bounces back stronger next season, but he truly has been worth what the Bruins gave up. At the time, it was like a pretty big price, but it was still a fair price. It's not like people were saying, oh, the Bruins really overpaid for this one. No, people were saying it was a fair price to pay. It was a right value trade, and then they end up going out and not actually having those picks mean anything, and Hampus Lindholm does everything he does, becomes Charlie McAvoy's 1B, is a true 1B defenseman. I'm going to give it an A because it was still a lot of capital. It wasn't like Taylor Hall where they barely gave up anything. They still gave up a lot for Hampus Lindholm. But I still think they really won the trade, and it was still a great trade for Don Sweeney. So I'm going to give this trade an A. Next, Don Sweeney, since he was already on a heater, he was like, man, I need to go out and get rid of one of my mistakes. He trades away Zachary Senyshyn and a 5th-round pick for Josh Brown and a conditional 7th-round pick. Now, this trade, Josh Brown, he was a nice little, 4th liner, didn't really play much. I don't even know if he played more than 40 games in a Bruins uniform, honestly. And overall, Senyshyn, it really was more of a just getting rid of a mistake, just trying to get rid of all that mess. I'm going to say the trade doesn't matter because it still stings just what Senyshyn was and what you turned him into. It doesn't matter. If you want to, you could say it's a C if you really want to. But I'm just going to say the trade doesn't matter. The damage had already been done by the miss on the draft pick, honestly. And then the next trade, we have another doesn't matter trade. Brady Lau does absolutely nothing in St. Louis. Trade him away for future considerations. That trade, like I said, does not matter. So Brady Lau, go ahead and B, does not matter. Now we are on to the most recent page. We are getting close to the modern day, people. As in 2022, around this time, David Krejci retired. The Bruins had signed Eric Howla to a 2x2, I believe it was. And that first year, Eric Howla wasn't too hot for the Boston Bruins. He clearly wasn't going to be able to be the 2C that they were really praying that he was going to be able to do and fill in for David Krejci. He just was not that guy. He ended up finishing with how many points? He actually had 44 points here in Boston. It wasn't that bad, but still, it just wasn't enough. I didn't love it. I didn't mind it for the price, but I still knew deep down, hey, it's not going to be what the Bruins need. And the Bruins ended up knowing that as well. They ended up doing a real hockey trade, 1-for-1, him for Pavel Zacha. And Zacha breaks out instantly, turns into a near 60-point man over the next couple years. Last year, had a down season, but this year, back to it, up over 60 points on the year. He has been absolutely incredible ad. It was a great 1-for-1 trade. Eric Howla then doesn't really do too much for New Jersey, at least not on the level of Pavel Zacha. Zacha was also younger than Howla at the time of the trade. I honestly thought it was really surprising that the Devils made the trade to begin with. I thought it was a really good trade for the Boston Bruins, and it only ended up being better and better as time has gone on. And Pavel Zacha has signed some really team-friendly contracts. He hasn't been robbing the Bruins any sort of way. He's been a great addition at a great price. I don't really like hearing him in trade rumors. I think he's a great player at the price he's at. But if we unload him for a great amount, then, do it. But still, the Bruins. I don't like saying we sometimes, but I do it sometimes anyway. So yeah, I'm honestly going to give this trade an A, okay? Some of you guys might be saying, no, it should be a B. I'm giving it an A. I think it was that good of a trade. I think Zach has outperformed Howla just that much. So I'm going to have to do that. Eric Howla, what has he done again over there for the New Jersey Devils? Like, they had him for a couple years. He got over 40 points the first year, then 35-21, got worse every year, and then ended up moving on to Nashville. And he's 34 years old. He's a lot older than Pavel Zacha. Well, let me bring that back over here. I didn't even realize I didn't have the stats on the screen. So, Pavel Zacha definitely outperforming Eric Howla in every sort of way. Taking a look at those stats, again, here's the Pavel Zacha stats. He's a lot younger. Like, I don't know what the Devils were thinking when they made this trade. Honestly, because of the age and the talent differential, like, they were similar in talent with a massive age gap. I don't get it. But I'm going to give that one an A-level trade. Pavel Zacha has been a great addition for the Boston Bruins. Next, we have a little bit of a nothing burger. Jack Studnicka, a former first-round pick for Michael DiPietro and Jonathan Myrenberg. Myrenberg is just a really big defenseman. He's like 6'5 or 6'6. Really big guy. Don Sweeney looking for his Char 2.0, which we'll talk about when we go over his free agent signings with Zadorov. But they go out, get Myrenberg, get Michael DiPietro, a nice AHL fringe, NHL goalie. I think he could have some NHL backup potential. Jack Studnicka, not really much for the Vancouver Canucks. I'm going to say this trade, just on the sheer fact that DiPietro could still be something, I'm going to give it a C. I'm going to rate it a C. No, I'm going to give it a doesn't matter. Because until Michael DiPietro really makes some noise in the NHL, this trade really doesn't matter. He could make some noise, but I don't really see it happening. Studnicka hasn't really been that special in Vancouver or anywhere else, so I'm just going to leave it as a doesn't really matter trade. And now we get on to the big year. I've been talking about it throughout this, the record-breaking year where they break the regular season record and then get bounced in the first round. They made a lot of trades, a lot of teams. Now, I was honestly shocked by this deadline for a few reasons, okay? I was shocked at how many teams went on buying sprees. Like Toronto went on a buying spree. I think Ottawa went on a buying spree. A lot of teams went on buying sprees when the Bruins were by far and away the top team in the conference. And one of the few teams that didn't go on a buying spree were the Florida Panthers, who ended up winning the Cup that year. So, clearly the buying sprees weren't working. But I just thought it was weird because it felt like teams were buying to match the Bruins. And the Bruins were just like, okay, we're just going to buy and get back ahead of you. And it worked! In the regular season, they were unbeatable in the regular season. And then the goaltending fell apart and just bad memories. So, because of that, they gave up so much value. Garnet Hathaway, they at least unloaded Craig Smith's contract in this deal, and then they traded a first, second, and a third for Garnet Hathaway, Dmitry Orlov. They traded away a first and a fourth for Tyler Bertuzzi, I wish the Bruins re-signed him. I thought he was made to be a Bruin. I thought he was made to be the Brad Marchand replacement. I thought it was perfect, and then they didn't end up keeping him. So, that was sad. Then he ended up going to Toronto, which really hurt, and now he's in Chicago. So, that's kind of crazy how many former Bruins are actually in Chicago, which we'll see in a second as well. But because of all the value that they gave up in these trades. Now, the picks, of course, we don't really know what these picks are really going to turn out to be. It's not like the earlier picks where we really know Jacob Perreault's not really going to be anything. You know, like these picks, truly, we have no idea what's going to happen with these first-round picks. So, but because of the fact they gave up so much value just to get a first-round exit out of this, like, I'm going to have to give it a D just based on the value. You could argue, now, this stuff could end up being a C-, C if all the draft picks they gave away don't end up being anything. I'm going to give the Orlov trade a C- just because they got rid of the Craig Smith contract. The Tyler Bertuzzi is a D. I'm going to, but they were great here as Bruins, especially Bertuzzi. He performed well in the playoffs. It was a bad moment. It was a bad moment. They ended up getting bounced in the first round. It's a tough look. And it's just the way it is, man. It's just the way it is. That one hurts the most, okay? But next, Keith Kincaid, a veteran. He was already a 30-year-old goalie, over to Colorado for Shane Bowers, a former first-round pick who I don't even think he's cracked the NHL lineup at all. Riley Walsh, who I don't think has touched the NHL lineup either. I think he's been a career AHLer. So this is going to be another trade that doesn't matter. One doesn't matter trade led into another doesn't matter trade. Hey, next we have the unload of a century. Now, I know the Bruins had like no cap space and they had to make some sort of moves and they were going to have to do some things. But I just cannot believe this felt like an NFL trade, okay? NFL trades, you see players get moved for like the lowest value of picks, and the argument turns into, oh, well, it's because of the cap and everything and how much money they're making. This felt like one of those trades. They traded Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno for Ian Mitchell. Nick Foligno overpaid the whole time. I didn't get it. He was another older guy that ended up getting an A, and I just didn't really get it. He wasn't that good. He was kind of nice as a veteran leader, I guess, but he was kind of slow. Wasn't the same guy who was in Columbus. He wasn't really that special in Columbus, honestly, either. That's why they were always bad. But, guys, this one, Ian Mitchell, and he was a nice 7th D-man, I guess. I guess he played some NHL time, but just how much, just everything they gave up. I just can't imagine that no one else would have given up something more. I can't imagine that. So because of that, I'm going to give it a D. I can't imagine someone wouldn't have given up a little more for Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno. Maybe no one would have. I don't know. But in my mind, you could have probably, and so it's a D. Next, Jacob Zaboral and a 3rd for Andrew Peeke. This is almost like Mike Riley. Andrew Peeke, I mean, this year he's been really bad. He's been really bad. But the initial idea of concept of getting Andrew Peeke, it's like whatever. He's a nice right-handed 6th defenseman, I guess. Like, he's whatever. Then you signed like a 3x3. He's the same thing as Mike Riley. What the fuck are you doing? Okay, Jacob Zaboral never really became much. He played like 70-something games in the NHL, and then a 3rd-round pick just because of what the Andrew Peeke contract, having to play him. He's not good. Because of that, I'm going to give this one a C-. Because at least you got an NHL player that's played more games than Jacob Zaboral. But it's still a C-. It's not a good move. Next, Patrick Maroon for Luke Toparski and a conditional 6th-round pick. Patrick Maroon, he actually was a nice little presence for the playoff run that year, even though, you know, it didn't really mean much. They got knocked out in the 2nd round by Florida. Fuck you, Florida. But overall, they didn't give up much for a nice little 3rd, 4th line, little grinder guy that had been to some cup finals, added some nice little presence to the team. So because of that, and because it was only a 6, I'm going to give it a C+, honestly. I like Patrick Maroon in a Bruins uni, I really did. Then we got another nothing burger, Jared McIsaac for Curtis Hall. Absolutely nothing. This is just an AHL trade. I don't even know who Jared McIsaac is, honestly. So this trade just does not matter, okay? Hey, this next little section, the Bruins making some moves, knowing they had to break up their super goaltending tandem with always the victory hugs after the game. Ullmark and Swayman, the best goalie tandem in the NHL. Couldn't win a cup with them. Very sad. But they ended up having to ship off Linus Ullmark, and they only got a 1st, Korpisalo and Mark Kasterlik back in return. Now, I say only because Korpisalo contract, at least Korpisalo got retained. But Jonas Korpisalo has sucked, okay? His save percentage has been under 900. He's not a good goaltender anymore. He was really good in Columbus. He had a nice little hot streak, got massive contracts, and he's just not that guy. I was praying that they were going to ship him out last summer. They didn't. They got to ship him out this summer. The guys in the AHL, Michael DiPietro is ready to come up. He could at least give you what Korpisalo is giving you, and it's just not worth it. But with that being said, Linus Ullmark, though, has not been hot in Ottawa either. Ottawa has really struggled with Ullmark. Ullmark's save percentage has been hovering around 900 as well. And I honestly kind of felt like Ullmark was probably going to fall off on another team just because of the sheer fact. Like, he was good in Buffalo, don't get me wrong. But he never had really been a pure starter. Even in Boston, he was always splitting time, and he was on the older side. It's like being that age and never really being a time owner, always a time splitter. I was a little worried for him. He's had some health issues, so I hope he's all good now. But the 1st-round pick they actually got back seems like it could actually be hitting. They drafted Dean Letourneau his first year at BC. Absolute crap. He only had like 3 points in 30 games. Then this year he's over a point per game. So he's had an incredible growth from year 1 to year 2. Hopefully he can keep growing, actually be a big power forward at the NHL level, because he's like 6'7", and he's a massive presence out there. And if he could be like a Tage Thompson light, that would be incredible for the Bruins. So at the time, I felt like the Bruins could have gotten more for Linus Ullmark. As time has gone on, Ullmark hasn't been the hottest player for Ottawa, and Dean Letourneau actually looks like he has some potential. And Mark Kasterlik is actually going to be a third, fourth line grinder here for many years, and I like the presence he brings as a bottom six center. I'm going to give it a B. I think they could have done better, but they actually had some pretty good value, and it seems like they might have actually hit on that first round pick, even though it was a later first round pick. Props to Don Sweeney on the Dean Letourneau pick, picking Boston College kids as he would do the following year with James Higgins. But I'm going to give that. And the next one, Vinny Lettieri for Jacob Lacko and a fourth round pick swap. Now, both of these guys wouldn't make that big of an impact. In fact, the Bruins would end up later reacquiring Jacob Lacko just to be a nice depth guy. It doesn't really matter this trade at all. They're just both some depth guys. I think Lettieri actually got some good NHL time with the Boston Bruins for a good minute. So maybe for that reason, you could argue it's a C+ trade. I'm just going to go ahead and give it, I think it's a C trade, but I'm going to give it a C+ because they ended up going out and getting Lacko again. Lettieri, he was here for a good little bit before. I think now he's in Florida now. He was a nice little depth guy. I'm just going to leave it in C. It was a nothing burger. It was pretty much just a simple swap. It was a C trade. But now we get to the real part where I feel like Don Sweeney kind of really showed his prowess as a general manager when it comes to trading. First trade he does when selling at the deadline. He trades Trent Frederick and Max Jones for Max Wagner, a second and a fourth. Now, of course, we don't know how these picks are all going to turn out or what's going to become of all of these. So we can only really go off of the value. So now it's more of a bit of a projection. So it's like if we decide what the Dougie Hamilton grade was back in the day, and like I said, it probably would have been more like a B. It was a pretty good value getting what you're getting for Dougie Hamilton, or C+, instead it's a D because of missing on the draft picks. So this is a bit more of we're just banking on the fact of what the pick value is at, okay? So with that, Trent Frederick, he signs a massive 8-year deal with the Oilers. Already looks like an absolutely terrible deal. And unloading that when you know you're not going to bring him back because he's a bottom six center that's overpaid. You know that. I think it's honestly a great trade. You were able to get a second out of Trent Frederick. And a fourth. So because of that, I'm going to give it a B. I'm going to give it a B trade because you knew you were going to get rid of him. I'm going to leave it in B because no one jumped up and made it a first for him. Teams have gotten first for third liners. Look at Toronto traded a first for Scott Laughton. So I'm going to give it a B. It's still good value for Trent Frederick when you're going to get rid of him, and he ends up being overpriced. The next trade is already incredible. I can't believe how good this trade has turned out. Justin Brazeau, a top 9 scorer, power forward, to Minnesota, reacquiring Jacob Lacko, getting Marat Kuznetsov, and a 6th round pick. If you asked me last year to pronounce Kuznetsov's name, I couldn't do it. I'd be like, it's a no-name trade. This trade's a whatever trade. Kuznetsov has turned into a first-line player on the Bruins this year. On a Bruins team that is probably, unless they really collapse, they're going to be a playoff team. And so because of that, what Kuznetsov has already become for Justin Brazeau, the pro scouting or Don Sweeney, whoever was like, get Kuznetsov, absolutely genius. He is the best player in this trade by far. And getting rid of Brazeau ends up leaving Minnesota. I don't even think he's there. I'm pretty sure he's signed in Pittsburgh. It's an A trade. Okay, I gave Frederick a B. I'm giving Kuznetsov an A. It is an absolutely incredible trade. Being able to get Kuznetsov for that, I could not believe. Then we're going to have another trade that this one's a little more of a nothing one. Daniel Mutil and for Mark McLaughlin to New Jersey. It's a whatever trade. New Jersey showed up quite a bit, honestly. I never realized how often Boston trades with New Jersey. But this trade is going to be a nothing trade as well. Got quite a few nothing trades in here, but I guess it's expected. And next, you got Henry Jokiharju for a 4th round pick. Now, Jokiharju, NHL 15 legend. Don Sweeney's honestly gotten a lot of NHL video game legends, honestly. But Henry Jokiharju, he's been a solid guy. I mean, he's nothing great. You want him on like your just bottom pair. I thought maybe in Boston we'd unlock him to be a top 4 guy. They haven't unlocked him to be that top 4 guy. He's just a final pairing 7th D guy. He's all right. I think, let me see, when is his contract up? And he's also on a 3x3. What is with Don Sweeney signing defenders to 3x3s? Okay. So knowing he's on a 3x3 and he's signed till 2027 through 2028, well, that's in 2 more years. He just signed this extension. It just got signed. Oh, man. I'm going to give this one like a C plus, a B. I'm going to give it a C because they still got a solid guy for a 4th. It's a slightly higher price than you'd want for a guy like Henry Yokoharju. So I'm just going to give it a C for right now. Maybe Yokoharju kind of does meet the potential that I felt like he could hit at, and I feel like a lot of people at one point felt like he could hit. But for right now, because of the contract he's on, I'm just going to give it a C. Okay, the next deal we got is the big one. Every Bruins, it's almost a staple of a Bruins GM, you know. You got to have your trade that you just robbed Toronto, okay, back in the day. Tuukka Rask for Andrew Raycroft, okay. Then you had Phil Kessel for what turned into Tyler Seguin and Dougie Hamilton. And now you got Don Sweeney doing his version. Brandon Carlo for Fraser Minton, a 1st-round pick and a 4th-round pick, baby. Now, why is this so special? Well, the Bruins could have really used Brandon Carlo. Honestly, they really could have used him, especially this year when they really need a right-handed defenseman, because they're relying on Henry Yokoharju and Andrew Peeke, who are both not that good. So, they really could have used Brandon Carlo this year. But what they got in return, so worth it. Fraser Minton, already playing first line. Now, he's not meant to be a first liner, I feel like. He's probably meant to be, could be a good second line. Maybe he's the next Bergeron. I don't know. He's a pretty good 2-way forward. But, no, he's still really solid. It's a young guy. I can't believe the Toronto Maple Leafs threw him in there with just how well he's played for the Bruins this year. He's easily been one of their top 5 best forwards on their team this year. Easily. And the 1st-round pick, this is big. Unless Toronto completes their collapse, which they're really trying, they're losing a lot of games, but not to Boston. It really would have been nice if the Bruins won it, though. But this 1st-round pick, it is top 5 protected, so it could end up being a future first. But if it's not, and it ends up being this year, it's going to be a top 10 pick. It is going to be an absolute steal of a trade, especially if the Bruins can hit. And when we get into the draft history, we'll get into why I might be a little more optimistic about their drafting, even though in the very beginning Don Sweeney was whiffing. More recently, it's pretty solid. So, honestly, the Brandon Carlo trade, it's honestly an A. With just what this pick could be, it could end up being a B if, say, Toronto, they end up being bottom 5, they get their pick back, and then next year they bounce back, and then it's just a middling first, and then they kind of whiff. It could still be a B because Fraser Minton's still a solid pick. But right now, I'm giving it an A. Getting Fraser Minton and that 1st and a later round pick, I don't care if they're retaining like $600,000 off Carlo. It's still an incredible trade to make. And then the next pick, the next trade, there was a lot of heat from Bruins fans when the Bruins made this trade. Brad Marchand for a conditional 2nd. It is now a 1st-round pick. We know it's going to be a 1st-round pick because Florida made it past the 2nd round. I knew it was going to be a 1st-round pick at the time. I thought it was kind of obvious Florida was going to make that into a 1st-round pick. And now Florida missing the playoffs this year. And, I mean, honestly, they're going to be even older in the future because that pick is going to be 2027 or 2028. They're going to be older. I think Marchand, yeah, he signed a 6-year deal. He is putting up points, but still at the age he was is not as bad as people say it is. I'm going to give it a B because it could end up being an A in the future. Just for right now, though, because he is still really solid. The Panthers did win a Stanley Cup. I was hoping they were just going to make it to conference finals and get bounced out. They didn't. They won it all with Marchand. Happy Marchand got a ring. Hate that was with Florida. But I'm still going to give it a B trade. I feel like getting a 1st out of a 37-year-old, almost, unless it's like Crosby, pretty much if you say you get a 1st-round pick for a 37-year-old, you're doing something right, usually people would say. And so that's what I'm going to say with that. And then the very last trade of this video of Don Sweeney's career so far. Well, this isn't updated, actually, because they have made one more. They ended up trading for Lucas Reichel for a conditional 6th-round pick, which I'll talk about in just a second. I actually don't have it sorted out on here. Oh, well. But the last one on this website, Charlie Coyle and a 5th for Casey Middlestad, William Zellers, and a 2nd-round pick. Now, maybe I'm crazy, and maybe when I said Charlie Coyle was overpaid, maybe NHL GMs just love the guy, and he's not overpaid by most teams. or according to most teams, I don't know. I mean, clearly Colorado wasn't happy with what they got because they ended up letting Charlie Coyle walk after this. So getting Casey Middlestat, who's going to be putting in multiple years for your franchise, getting William Zellers, who's a nice young prospect with a lot of potential, and a second-round pick for Charlie Coyle as a rental, I'm going to genuinely give this one an A. Because I thought Middlestat and Coyle, they're honestly pretty equal. Coyle does bring a little more physicality and penalty killing and defense, I know. But they're still, like, it's not like Middlestat's that much worse. You get a second William Zellers. I feel like I really like it. I think he honestly did an excellent job. Now, I don't have Lucas Reichel on this tier list. If I were to, Lucas Reichel for a 6th-round pick, it says B, honestly, for just a 6, getting an NHL or C+. I won't overdo it with Lucas Reichel. He's a former 1st-round pick, though. Just for a 6th-round pick, I really like it. So overall, I mean, this looks, honestly, like, he's honestly been a very average trader when you break it down like this. But I feel like when you go into, like, Dougie Hamilton, value-wise, it was good. It's brought down by the drafting, okay? Carl Soderberg, that was a complete miss. Jimmy Hayes, that was a miss. Lee Stepniak, that was also pretty rough. The early years are rougher than the newer years, okay? Then the only newer year trades, the only 2020s trade that pops up in this really bad tier list are the ones where it's like he went all in and it's just like the collapse of the 2023-2024 season really does it in with the Orlov and Bertuzzi. But still, guys, overall, I gotta say, more recently, he definitely has earned his job more recently in trading than he did previously. I feel like he's done a better job at having to sell the assets than he was at always buying the assets. I feel like he's gotten better, though, in his more recent years when he was doing some buying. This past season, I was so grateful he didn't do a trade. There was rumors he was going to trade one of the 1st-round picks. I was like, no, keep the 1st. Let's pick again. Maybe you won't double miss because you have some better draft history in more recent years, as we will go over in the next video because this one is long enough. This is the Don Sweeney trade tier list. Let me know what you think, where you would rank these trades, how you would rank Don Sweeney's tenure, and how you would rank his trades that he has made during this tenure. I say overall, just doing a quick glance at it and where I would rank Don Sweeney's overall score, I'd give it a B. Because he did make the trades with Marcus Johansson. He was part of the playoff run. He got this team to a cup final. I do care somewhat about the breaking of the regular season, but the way it ended was still wicked tough. But, guys, overall, I'd give it a C+ to a B for his actual overall tenure. Let's use Rick the Dick. C plus B for Don Sweeney overall is where I'm giving him. Let me know where you guys rank him. But this is how I have the rest of his tenure here in Boston. Every ranking you see here. Let me know if you think that I'm wrong and that me saying all that equates to a B is wrong. Let me know if you think my own scaling is kind of wrong with it. I don't know. Guys, let me know. This is a massive video. I want to do his drafting and his re-signing / free agencies too. This was a massive one, though, just to get those trades out. So thank you for watching. Have a good one. God bless.